a former house of the Red Army in Bolekhiv. On October 28th, 29th, 1941, during the first Nazi action against local Jews, over 1,000 Jews were brutally tortured here. Many died. Those who remained were marched to the Tanyawa forest and murdered there. This plaque was erected by families of the Jewish martyrs, Bolechow descendants, righteous among the nations, and the Bolekhiv community, August 2009.
טוב, מה שקרה כאן זה קשור לניצחונות הגדולים שהיו לגרמנים.
Each time that there was a major German victory, there followed an action. The Germans had a huge victory in Russia in which they took 600,000 prisoners, and thereafter they conducted a major action here. 2 battalions of militia, of police militia came, one from Nuremberg and one from Vienna, and they conducted an action in Stanislava. It was conducted during the daytime without any attempt at hiding anything. The commander who conducted it was Hans Krieger, who was a very famous anti-Semite at the time. What had happened was that there were problems raising the so-called contribution, which was like the ransom money in gold and money and valuables, which were collected from the Jews of Bolechow, and they had trouble raising that money. And the Jews of Bolechow understood or believed that the cause of the action was their inability to maintain the payments in time. However, according to the research, the probable real reason was that there was a lack of food in the area. The German army had taken a great deal of the food, and one way to deal with the lack of the food was to kill the people. On the morning of the 28th of October, that was a Tuesday, trucks arrived from Stanislava with units of the SS and also grave diggers. As had happened in Lvov and other places, there was a list of about 130 names, leaders and intelligentsia in the community who were regarded as possible leaders of any kind of action, anti-action against this, and they were the first people who were listed. Because they couldn't find all of the 130 people, news had come of the action in Stanislava, and therefore some people had already escaped or tried to run away. They started to seize anybody they could find and bring them to this building. They decided to link the 2 kinds of action together, the action against the intelligentsia and leaders and the general population. So they collected everybody they could find on the list, and others told them to bring warm clothing since they were going to travel far away, and also to bring their valuables with them. At the same time, they took the opportunity to loot the houses and to take whatever valuables they could find, for example, the women's rings and so on. The Germans paid rewards, and a large number of people gathered and formed a gauntlet. The people who came before they went into the building, they were required to run the gauntlet and were beaten by the crowd that had been offered rewards by the Germans. And the same thing happened once they were inside, if they needed to go out to the toilet or anything, they also had to go through a similar kind of gauntlet. They closed the windows. They had metal iron furnaces inside, boilers, which they lit and heated to a huge temperature inside. All the people were required to lie down and were not allowed to raise their head. From the balcony, they occasionally shot into the crowd on the floor, especially anybody who did try to move. There is a rumor, which is unsubstantiated, that they also spread a certain type of powder which caused people to cough and to suffocate. One woman started to give birth during this event. She and the baby, of course, both died. In the evening, they sort of had a kind of a festival. There was a blind pianist called Bruckenstein, who was required to play the piano, and they danced with naked girls and forced to dance, of course. they called the rabbis to the stage, and as was customary at that time, the rabbis were required to give a sermon in which they explained that the Jews, for their many sins and for the evil that they had done in the town, were being punished by God. It is not sure whether they crucified one or two of the rabbis. Certainly one of them was crucified. The body of one of them disappeared. They're not listed among the 28 victims who died in this building. Then they said that people should get ready. There was going to be an evening meal. Then from the balcony they opened fire with a light machine gun and announced that this was their evening meal. They then demanded that the people give up any further valuables that they had on them, and they conducted a body search, especially among the women. And it is said that, I'm not sure how accurate this is, but the 11 people who they've discovered things on their body were taken onto the stage and shot. This kind of torture continued to the next day. Again, the shooting with the joke that this was breakfast. There was a lull in the activity because of night and so on, but the next day more people were being gathered and being collected, and in addition quite a lot of peasants arrived from surrounding villages hoping to be able to get some of the plunder and loot. It is not entirely clear how many people were in fact collected, because there were people from the town, there were refugees, there were people from Poland, there were people who were passing through, and so the total number is not known. That first evening, a number of managers from local factories came and requested that some of their more important workers would be released, and they were in fact released, as were members of the Judenrat at that point. They were released because they were essential workers in the factories. As a result of that release of some of the essential workers, the rumor grew that in fact that if you were working, you stood a much better chance of survival, and therefore many people tried to find work or took on work in these various factories and workshops. People who were too young, as Josef and Shlomo, they claimed to be older, and also the Germans utilized this, handed out all sorts of lovely diplomas and licenses, which of course in the end proved to be useless. By this time in the building there had been up to about 850 people. They were made to go through all sorts of military drills, a lineup, and it took hours, and of course they were all extremely exhausted by then. They were taken to the Tanyava forest, probably almost certainly on trucks, although there is some confusion as to whether they were marched. There is a statement that they were marched away, or some were taken on trucks and some not. There were also SS guards and grave diggers. The Judenrat was ordered by the Germans to clean the place up, and 28 bodies were taken out of here and taken and buried in a mass grave near the cemetery. And that is what we should remember of this place and what happened here. And I must remind you that Joseph's father was among the people. She would like to recall the name of her uncle, who was one of the intelligentsia who was brought here. In that list of 130 names, he was among the list.
שמו היה איציק פדר. הוא נכנס לבניין וראה מה שקורה, או שהבין מה שהולך לקרות.
He entered the building, saw what was about to happen, understood what was about to happen. He was the first who tried to escape. He was shot on the spot and killed.